Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, and to Harriet and the college for having me over. It's a very great honor to speak to you all today. Just by way of sort of a content note, which makes my talk seem like it's on fantastically cheery subjects, but we will be, of necessity, discussing sexually transmitted infection at length, but there will be also passing references to child abuse and sexual violence. So if anyone needs to step out of the room for a moment for any reason, obviously that is absolutely grand. But to begin, the institutional culture of 20th century Ireland, particularly in the fields of medicine, health, and welfare, has rightly been characterized as abusive, repressive, and authoritarian. You don't need me to tell you maybe some of the references of these, but the Ryan Report on Child Abuse, the McAleese Report on Magdalen Laundries, revelations in the press concerning the inhumane conduct of Catholic mother and baby homes, all illustrate the ways in which the Catholic Church and successive Irish governments colluded to leave patients often in a vulnerable or silenced state. For social historians of medicine, a key casualty of this top-down institutional culture has been records of the personal experiences of the individuals who occupied these institutions. Roy Porter's famous call to write the history of medicine from below notwithstanding then, Irish medical historiography has long struggled to recover the ever-elusive patient voice. My aim today is to go some way to addressing this silence by discussing a selection of letters set to Dr. Thomas Percy Kirkpatrick, 20th century Ireland's probably foremost venereologist, an amateur historian of medicine, and, as has been noted, a former registrar of this college, a meticulous record keeper, and I thank him very much for having been so, by current and former patients in the mid-1920s. So, Kirkpatrick, Kirk to his friends, was born in 1864, he died in 1959, and lived through one of the most tumultuous periods of Irish history. In a long and varied career, his burning passion, both professionally and academically, though one hopes not personally, was what was then termed venereal disease, syphilis, gonorrhea, and soft chancre. The Dublin and Irish medical journals contain numerous articles by Kirkpatrick on the treatment, the impact, and the history of venereal disease. These texts were rooted in his experiences of diagnosing and treating the illnesses through a discreet early morning clinic at Dr. Stephen's Hospital. In accordance with the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Venereal Disease, this clinic was funded by the state, unusually at the time. As a result, Kirkpatrick's clinic served a wide and varied client base, many of whom remained in contact with their physician long after the treatment had come to an end. And it is these letters held at the college in the archives that I will be discussing today. And as such, his correspondence offers us a pretty unprecedented insight into the sexual and social life of an Ireland caught in the turmoil of a hard-won independence and ensuing civil war. In what follows, I will try to unpack what these letters can tell us about the political, cultural, and social experiences of Irish venereal disease sufferers. I will discuss what they can reveal about the relationship these patients felt themselves to enjoy with the institutions in which they were treated. And in doing so, I hope to suggest some of the ways in which questions of sexual conduct and national identity were often bound up in Ireland, and put some pressure, I hope, on long-standing myths about the sexual life of the Irish, or the absence thereof. No sex, please, we're Irish. In both the popular imagination and much Irish historiography, Ireland in the early 20th century may as well have been dead below the waist. From the outcry that greeted J.M. Singh's The Playboy of the Western World to some of the more histrionic presentiments of the No campaign in the recent abortion referendum, the Irish have long been anxiously lauded as the most virtuous and chaste people on earth. This perspective is echoed in the work of historians such as Tom Inglis, who argue that the moral monopoly, as he put it, of the Catholic Church in Ireland led to levels of sexual repression pretty much unprecedented in modern Europe. A sense of the shame and anguish to which this repressive culture might have given rise is undoubtedly available to us in the Kirkpatrick letters. In one, a former patient contacts Kirkpatrick to discuss a relapse of symptoms. I'll summarize some key sort of phrases within it. So she notes how the trouble I had over 2 years ago was my own fault, and my husband was not aware of it. I am nervous of it at present. And she notes again, when it was all through my own dirt that I was like I was. The anguished tone of the letter, the patient's repeated insistence on blaming themselves for their present condition, and the moralistic tone through which they characterize their conduct and the illness all reflect a sort of internalized discourse of shame regarding desire and its potentially pathological outcomes. A similar tone of hopelessness and desperation is struck in what is perhaps the most affecting and blunt letter in the collection, in which a former patient says, "The only good turn you can do me now, pray, doubly underscored, for me to die, doubly underscored, yours faithfully, E.M." However, letters such as these are the exception, not the rule, and they should give us pause for thought even in themselves. So, myth-busting time. Turning back to the first letter I showed you, it's worth noting that however anguished the tone, the frankness with which this patient discusses both her symptoms and the implied infidelity or premarital sex through which she contracted her infections belie long-held stereotypes of the Irish as an infamously sexless and repressed people. So, she talks about having a slight discharge, whatever the cause of this, it's unknown to her husband, etc. This is, she's very forthright. In another letter, we find a Mrs. B asking Kirkpatrick to, quote, certify that she had to be treated for disease as things were not right between her and her husband, with whom she is living unhappy. Several things. She explains that she is seeking this certification to support a petition for a legal separation to end the marriage and promises to see Kirkpatrick as soon as matters are fixed up. Several things stand out for me about this. The first is the reminder it offers that prior to the 1937 Constitution, divorce was legal in Ireland, and as this letter suggests, not necessarily an uncommon occurrence or an unprecedented occurrence. As distressing as the circumstances may be, we can kind of infer that Mrs. B has presumably been either infected through infidelity herself or by her husband, who has either concealed his infection from her before marriage or has subsequently been infected through infidelity. Nevertheless, Mrs. B's request is communicated in a matter-of-fact tone that reflects only really her strong and straightforward desire to bring an end to the marriage. The letter is also striking, I think, in the range of pastoral functions it reveals Kirkpatrick's clinic to have played for its author. On the one hand, Kirkpatrick is invoked as a figure of sort of patriarchal authority who can back up Mrs. B's testimony, which is, perhaps kind of particularly significant given her presumably Catholic background, based on kind of her surname and so on. On the other hand, as her desire to visit Kirkpatrick in the aftermath of the separation proceedings makes clear, Mrs. B also viewed him as a valued confidant and advisor. Her letter likewise asks Kirkpatrick to pass on her regards to Nurse Conway, as she would love that Nurse were here that she could tell her all her troubles. Okay? A further indication of the admittedly gendered networks of social and emotional support that patients found in Kirkpatrick's clinic. It was not merely a kind of, clinical space in that regard. At the more light-hearted and undoubtedly stereotype-reinforcing end of the spectrum, we have the following, a letter from a Wexford gentleman afflicted with cramps who sought liquid relief for his ailment. Dear sir, you will excuse me in taking the liberty in writing to you, but I think it best to let you know that on a few occasions I took cramp in my stomach and I had to take a few drops of whiskey and some stout. I would be very thankful to you if you would kindly let me know if it would be injurious to my complaint if I was to continue to take a drop of stout or whiskey now and again, as I am fond of some. Thanking you in anticipation, I am, sir, and this is the bit I love, yours fraternally, Mr. R. As the bibulous correspondent's pointedly matey sign-off makes clear, Kirkpatrick's patients could exploit both his good nature and the codes of homosocial intimacy in an effort to reformulate their treatment along more convivial lines. So, to explore another dimension of this then, to turn to the kind of politics of sexual health and the War of Independence, the final letter I wish to discuss with you today is simultaneously one of the most fascinating but also the most upsetting in the Kirkpatrick collection. Addressed in a disordered hand to the doctor of the Lockup Hospital, Dublin, and written in an obvious state of distress by an English sex worker, the letter offers a snapshot of the fraught, sectarian, and gendered politics of sexual health, which marked the Irish War of Independence. So, I'll make a stab at making this as clear as possible. Dear sir, I'm writing to beg you to give consideration to what I am here stating. I am suspected to be deceased. Presumably she means diseased. It's an unfortunate but pregnant slip. At least it is so stated by county doctors who have tried putting writings on me and daily fumings. I was in the city of Dublin about 3 years ago, as followed through the street by fuming of gas, and wiring was held on my head to keep me distinct from the rest. The English military were there at the time, and I, being English, thought they would favour me, but not so. Death Head was burned on me, and as a diseased case, Death Head is still burnt onto me and stink, and I can't make it out. They mocked that my head was a phone for the wiring to be burned to, and the reason I am writing to you is to get you to either examine or see into my case. I am poor only for that I would gone to the city and got myself examined. I was in the Coombe Hospital 7 years ago and was treated for slight rupture of the wound. I wrote there and got no answer to my letter. I have not been fast, so I can't make it out. The doctor of Emo Dispensary has not made a statement to myself that I was deceased, but I've heard it through the wiring burnt to my head. If they wish to prove me a case for asylums, then I must go to an English asylum, for I was born to an English mother, which they never cease to remind me. I must be begging you to excuse the liberty that I have taken. The disordered and distressing narrative, rendered obscure not only by the author's low level of literacy, but by the traumatic nature of the events described and the effects of what may be psychosis, neurosyphilis, it's hard to tell, I hesitate to diagnose, concern the woman's experiences in Dublin circa 1920, where she appears to have been branded by a group of British soldiers. Interpreting the account is difficult, as I've said, for a number of reasons. It's hard to ascertain, for example, whether the fuming of gas to which she refers is fog, the smoke from buildings damaged in the ongoing conflict, or a hallucination of some kind. What is clear in what she tells us is that in her version of events, upon entering Dublin, she sought to engage in sex work with British troops. Having been born to an English mother, she expected to receive favourable treatment at their hands. However, upon discovering that she was infected, they used a heated wire to brand her with a death's head, a skull, and crossbones to distinguish her from other women who took the soldiers as their clients. While doing so, they appear to have mocked her about the nature of the branding. The scars from this incident persist and may have become infected. She notes that they stink. Her local physicians have made her feel further stigmatized by putting writings on her and subjecting her to what she describes as daily fumings. She has unsuccessfully attempted to communicate with the Coombe Hospital, where she had previously been treated, and has been informed that if she wishes to enter an asylum, presumably a Magdalen laundry for the rescue of fallen women, as they were then known, or potentially a psychiatric hospital, she will have to return to England. At the level of patient experience, the woman's letter illustrates the immense and violent stigma that could be attached to venereal disease, especially among sex workers in times of armed conflict. This is not a new or surprising phenomenon. You see it again and again. Compounding this traumatic stigma is the extent to which the woman feels herself to be the subject of coercive authorities whose intentions remain unclear to her. This is not patient-centered care. At a political level, her letter reveals the complex network of sectarian assumptions which govern both the treatment of sex workers and venereal disease sufferers in the aftermath of the War of Independence, and the role that sexual health could play in defining and undermining the boundaries of national identity during the conflict. The woman believes that her British heritage would secure her the favour, presumably custom, but also maybe preferable treatment of the soldiers. However, her diseased state undermines this identification and sees her treated in a brutal and callous manner. It is only when the woman seeks treatment for her infection and the abuse to which it gave rise that suddenly her English identity is invoked, this time to exclude her from care. She must go to an English asylum. Underpinning the constant reminders she says that she receives concerning her British blood appears to be the implied assumption that both venereal disease and sex work are English problems, alien to Ireland and its population. So, to conclude then, as these letters suggest, the experiences of venereal disease patients in Ireland were seldom uniform, and were often far removed from received notions of the Irish as a repressed and pure-minded people. On the one hand, as my final example indicates, they reveal the significance of sexual health as a category in efforts to police and reinforce the boundaries of Irish identity, and the distressing, abusive, and often violent practices to which it could give rise, a history that has never seemed more timely. On the other, they demonstrate just as clearly that, they demonstrate just as clearly the ways in which a self-possessed and forthright group of patients engaged with the financial, medical, and pastoral resources offered by Kirkpatrick and his clinic in a manner remarkably similar to the present day. What these patient voices offer us are examples of sexual life in Ireland not only at its most sensational and exceptional, but at its most mundane and quotidian. Not only then the English sex worker, abused and policed by British and Irish authorities alike, but also the chancer with stomach cramp, who just wants to ensure that his treatment doesn't negatively impact his drinking. In seeking to uncover the history of sexual health in Ireland, I wish to suggest then we must tune our ear to both. More than this, in an age of record levels of HIV/AIDS infection in Ireland and increasingly drug-resistant sexually transmitted infection the world over, I would suggest that these letters offer a valuable opportunity for us as not only historians of medicines, but as practitioners of medicine, to learn and understand the experiences of those living long term with incurable sexual conditions or conditions that are difficult to treat. Thank you very much.